glass is not great, but...
So this is a real umbrella? Or?
Now it's umbrella for the... Můžeme se poobrat posaďte a už začneme. Pavlenko, taky už nikam nechodíme, začínáme. Okay. So, and I will just wait until Pavel will sit down and we can finally start. So, and since now I think we are already online, I will just introduce briefly Michele, not only for our public but also for the wider audience. So we are starting our third workshop, which is dedicated to the traveling and the movement in the Middle Ages, especially to the holy places. So pilgrimages as a movement, but not only. And Michele Bacci will be the key speaker for all the week. He will give us 5 lectures. And those lectures will a bit tell us about this pilgrimage through sea to Jerusalem. And so one of the major Christian pilgrimages, if not the major one. And Michele Bacci is professor at Freiburg University. He's one of the, I would say, most important living medievalists. He authored several books. I would maybe just remember the last one, which is called The Mystic Cave, and is dedicated to the Nativity Church in Bethlehem. The previous one was about the many faces of Christ. And I will maybe also remind the Pennello dell'Evangelista, which makes Michele become a sort of legend, because he wrote this book quite young and it was accepted in a very enthusiastic way by the critics, at least reading the book reviews, which are quite positive. And Michele is specialist of many things. I would say that's always difficult to say what is the Michele speciality, but he's interested in general in the Mediterranean space, in the movement between the different places of Mediterranean. He studied Venice, he studied central Italy, he studied Holy Land, and he's also interested in the, let's say, Far East Christian space, like Caucasus, which is also one of the center of interest of the Center for Religious Studies. And this is not the only reason why Michele is one of our, let's say, closest friends, because Michele is also part of the editorial board of Convivium, although he's also the director of Iconographica, this important Italian peer-reviewed journal which is dedicated to iconography through the centuries in the Ogier. So I think I thought everything is just an honor to have you here with us, Michele, and we are looking forward to hear your lectures.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I think I am much grateful to you for inviting me to hold lectures here in front of real pilgrims. I mean, I can just say to be a virtual pilgrim because I have been obsessed by this phenomenon of pilgrimage in the Middle Ages since many years now, unfortunately. And this is one of the main reasons why I'm going to speak about sea travel to the Holy Land. But first of all, I would like to say that what I'm going to present here is not just the outcome of my personal research. Just on the contrary, it is due to the work of 5 collaborators of mine, who are working on different aspects of sea pilgrimage to Jerusalem in the wider frame of a project financed by the Swiss National Fund, whose title, as you see, is Von Venedig zum Heiligen Land, from Venice to the Holy Land. So the setting and perception, it's a little bit a strange title, setting and perception of pilgrimage sites along the Mediterranean coasts in the chronological frame between 1300 and 1550. That is the period which has been called that of the Grand Voyage à Jérusalem. So my collaborators are here. You see a nice photo, a nice picture, and some less nice portraits which I asked them to provide me with, but not very successfully. But in any case, as you see, we have specialists for each area touched by a late medieval pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So Angela Schifauer is dealing with Venice, Vesna Shepanovic with Istria and Dalmatia, Gianvito Campobasso with Albania, Iro Dermitsaki with Corfu, Modon and Coron in the Peloponnesus, the Strophades Islands and Crete. Then Sofia Zoito deals with Rhodes, and myself I deal with Cyprus and, let's say, the Holy Land. But actually our project does not really deal with the Holy Land itself, which would be the topic for a much bigger project. Actually, what we have been doing in these last years was, first of all, to collect all pilgrimage sources from this period. We collected about 373 travelogues. Some of them were completely unpublished, and they were written in all possible European languages, including Czech, and Sabina helped us a lot with deciphering these documents, let's say. But obviously we also have many Latin, French, Italian, Spanish, German, what else? Greek, Russian, Russian texts. So from almost everywhere. This is due to the fact that the pilgrimage became extremely popular after the fall of Acre. This is something which I still find a little bit disappointing, because one would be led to imagine that the Crusades were the most important period in the history of Holy Land pilgrimage. But in some way, after the Crusaders left, many more pilgrims started visiting the holy places of Palestine, and in some way, perhaps pilgrimage came to surrogate the Crusader experience. So Latins were no longer enabled to possess the Holy Land, but this possession came through visit to the holy sites themselves. It is part of the story, and we should always bear in mind that the Crusades themselves were described as pilgrimages. So there is obviously something which persists in this story. Perhaps just one basic theoretical problem. Why should one go on pilgrimage? I don't know if you spoke about this during your wanderings around France, but actually, if one would follow St. Paul's line of thought, for example, one should not have any form of locative experience of the holy. There should be nothing on earth deserving public or individual worship, because God has no residence on earth. St. Paul is very clear about that. After the crucifixion, after the resurrection, God abandoned his old earthly residence on the Temple Mount. You remember the veil of the temple was opened. Everybody could see that all the Sancta Sanctorum was completely empty and abandoned by God in the very moment when he was sacrificed on the cross. So this is one of the major contradictory questions in the history of Christianity. Why should one go on pilgrimage and pay worship to a portion of ground deemed to be hallowed on some, according to different possible factors? So obviously the first objects of worship are saints' tombs. Then we have portions of ground in Palestine associated with the memory of the Gospels or the major Gospel events. In both cases, it can be extremely complicated to understand the extent to which they deserve being worshipped. Because in a way, at least in practice, it is as if Christians admitted the possibility that there is indeed an alternative way to access the holy, which is not through sacraments. And this is obviously problematic. Astonishingly enough, there is not so much in theological literature about such issues. We can say that perhaps the most important documents we have date from the period of the Crusades. In that period, one starts defining the holiness of the Holy Land. There are at least a thought to explain why the Holy Land is so holy. Well, there was also a phase in late antiquity where such issues were debated. But for many centuries, it was not a crucial argument. In the 14th century, we found sometimes in Pilgrims' travelogues thoughts about this problem, especially in travelogues of pilgrims who were also priests or friars or so on. And, for example, Wilhelm von Boldensele. Now, this is an astonishingly important text which until now has not been published in an accessible way. There is only a master thesis from Christine Deleuze of the 1970s. So you have to access this thesis, otherwise there is no way to know the text unless you want to read it in a very old 17th century edition. Anyway, I don't know if you are comfortable with Latin quotations, but I think it sounds better if I read it directly in the original text. So he says, quia licet spirituales substantiae loco non circumscribantur, et in super Deus nec loco determinetur illius tamen potissime esse dicuntur, et ille partes ipsius maxime deputantur ubi, et in quibus operationes et effectus virtutis ipsarum magis contingerit apparere. So he admits that there is a contradiction here. God cannot be circumscribed in a place, but indeed, anyway, these places deserve devotion. Because God operated through them. So in some way, he is applying the traditional doctrine worked out actually during iconoclasm for images and, let's say, religious materiality in general, to holy sites. Anc benedictam terram Christus moriens nobis mortis testamento reliquit. So this holy land of Jerusalem is something we have inherited from Christ himself. He gave it to us as an heritage. Et ascendens in celum elevatis super eam manibus tanquam veris fidei Abrae filiis, quem Deus at anc terram venire et eam inhabitare iusserat confirmavit. So it was a sort of confirmation of the old alliance made with Abraham. Ipsam igitur tanquam patriam et hereditatem ex fide Christi mi quodammodo debitam visitare a pueritia desideravi, ut viderent testes oculi que proposita sepius erant auri per aures. His German, his Latin is not conception. Yeah, no, anyway, so in some way, the Holy Land is, he implies that the Holy Land is the native country of all Christians, because there was operated, Christ operated his mission, let's say. And so this is something which he wished to visit since his childhood, in such a way that that eyes may see, may apprehend what his ears had heard many times. And this is a very important point, because you know, eyes, the apprehension through eyes is considered in a long part of Christian tradition as an important part of devotional experience, which in some way parallels reading of texts. And so it can implement this experience you can have through the texts. And it's interesting, we as art historians, we frequently speak about the parallelism between texts and images. But in the Middle Ages, they tend to insist on the fact that text, scriptures, are not enough to have a complete devotional experience. It is frequently implied that texts are insufficient but there is a very clear reason, because the evangelists themselves say that they were unable to write all that was made by Christ during his passage on earth, because this would be impossible. So they were perfectly aware that scriptures were restituting just a short part of sacred history. So this in some way paved the way for imagining that knowledge coming from text could be implemented with something different. And spatial experience, the experience of the Holy Land, was considered to be a way which may enable visitors, pilgrims, to reconstruct this story in their mental experience. So the movement and the physical experience of sights parallels, or is, so to say, the first step, which leads to a complete experience, a mental reconstruction of the holy events in the proper way, in a full way, which goes beyond the limits of Scripture. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's enough, I think, for that, and let's go to practical issues. So this is a map of Europe around the year 1400. You see a very complicated network of borders, small states, larger states, and so on. Well, given the political situation with the Ottoman expansion in the South Balkans and Anatolia, and the Mamluk Empire in Egypt and Palestine and Syria, well, it becomes completely unsafe to try to go by feet. It was probably as dangerous as it is today, I think, or perhaps a little bit less. And in some way, you know, there is perhaps at the beginnings of the 14th century a sort of competition between Genoa and Venice for establishing a sort of monopoly in the organization of the trip, of the voyage to Jerusalem. Venetians are successful. Only a very few pilgrims go through Genoa. One of them is, for example, Anselm Adorno, a Flemish merchant, from Bruges, who was of Genoese origins, so probably he wished to visit Genoa too. But most of them go to Venice, especially because, you know, over there, some important ship owners organized a sort of cruise, let's say, every year. So it was, everybody in Europe knew that he or she had to gather in Venice in a specific period, twice a year normally, in May and September, to embark for the Holy Land. And everything was organized in a very specific, special way, but I will speak about this tomorrow. But I think that Venice, in this way, becomes a sort of liminal space from many different viewpoints. First of all, Venice is the first real step of the trip to the Holy Land. So in some way it becomes involved in also in the symbolism associated with the final goal of pilgrims. Second, Venice is, its landscape, its physical setting is itself a liminal space. It's on the borders between sea and earth. It's already another dimension vis-à-vis that of ordinary experience for most pilgrims coming from overall Europe. So when they come to Venice, they are astonished at seeing this very unusual town and start imagining what in the way to the extent to which this experience of this very old town can anticipate the marvels they expect to see in the Holy Land. One has to say that pilgrims the most part of pilgrims are German-speaking. I mean, statistically, or at least, we are speaking of only of those pilgrims who left a travelogue, who decided to write a travelogue, and a great many are German-speaking, writing in the different German dialects, in Hochmitteldeutsch, but also in Niederländisch, or, you know, very complicated and Niederrheinisch, very complicated dialects. Then the second group is the French, and the third group is constituted by Italians. Then we have Spaniards and other peoples. English people, we also have important English people, especially because normally they are more original than the other. They remark things which are not noted by other pilgrims. Okay, well, sometimes, but I won't speak about that, sometimes they even describe their trip by horse or by feet, but we have to say that most of these pilgrims were privileged people, so princes, counts, noblemen. So they went off trip with a big company of, accompanying people who served them, and they changed their horses very frequently. So they had some comforts and facilities. But sometimes we have interesting descriptions of all what they saw. The last one I said, I have a Frenchman whose name was Pierre Barbatre, who has made an incredible description of all guest houses in Germany. So So I went to the White Goof or something in Aachen, and he describes how pilgrims got drunken very easily in such situations and so on. Okay. In some, I was much disappointed by this pilgrim from the beginnings of the 16th century, because, you know, for example, for Bethlehem, this was a completely unpublished pilgrim. So when a colleague of mine in Fribourg University, who's professor for medieval French literature, accepted to give a pupil of theirs, you know, this topic for a master thesis. And so we had an available edition of this text. So I immediately went to check what he was saying about Bethlehem, and he said, "Oh, Bethlehem has been described many times, so it is not worth writing again." But on the contrary, he describes all these guest houses and restaurants and even where one could find prostitutes, for example. So, in some way, the profane background, let's say, of pilgrims is sometimes astonishing. They were devout, they were pious, but at the same time, they did not dismiss their habits. Well, okay. So, what is important to stress since the very beginning is that the voyage began in Venice. You know, the navigation in the Eastern Mediterranean has a big advantage if compared with the western part of the Mediterranean, because you can go almost always along the coasts, more or less until Rhodes. The most dangerous stretch is between Rhodes and Cyprus, because Anatolia is under Turkish occupation, so it's dangerous to stop in the Turkish ports. So from Rhodes to Paphos or from Rhodes to Famagosta, you have to go through the open sea, and this may be extremely dangerous. But one has to say that this line, let's say, of navigation corresponds to a big commercial way which was used by Venetian merchants. And in some way we will see that this two dimension of commercial sailing and pilgrimage somewhere overlap in strange ways. Okay. And it has to be said that in the course of the 14th and 15th and the early 16th century, this navigation way becomes a sort of corresponds actually to the area of expansion of the Republic of Venice, the so-called Stato da Mar, which includes practically the most important ports along the coasts of Dalmatia, Albania, Greece, Crete, Rhodes, and finally also Cyprus. So it is in this perspective of Venetian continuity in some way that we have to consider the circumstances of late medieval Holy Land pilgrimage. So this leads to a sort of mythization of Venice. The lagoon is invested itself with a sacred symbolism it probably didn't own before the beginning of late medieval pilgrimage. I mean, since the very moment when pilgrims start visiting Venice with the pilgrim's eyes, with their wishes to see to see holy mementos in some way associated with their final goal, since that very moment, Venice becomes a sort of holy city. Even if it is, Venice is itself a non-lieu par excellence. It has no history. It was founded after the beginning of Christianity. So, which holy mementos of the Christian apostolic era you can have in such a place? They can only be brought there from another place. This is a very, dangerous strategy, which is developed in many cases in the Middle Ages. For example, in Constantinople, this is the most important precedent to Venice. Constantinople was founded in the 4th century, so it was not really, it had never been really visited by the apostles because it didn't exist. And even if they tried to invent that St. Andrew came through the old Byzantium and in some way he left the traces of his passage, but actually the real truth, and I think even the Byzantines were perfectly aware of this, was Constantinople simply did not exist and could not pretend to have an apostolic authority because of any connection with the apostles and the apostolic mission. With Venice, the situation was even worse because it was founded much later. But obviously, this was an important political and commercial center in the 14th century, one of the richest towns in Europe in that period, and the starting point of the pilgrims' experience of the Holy Land. So it is not by chance, in my view, that relics are more and more frequently mentioned in Venice, starting from the very moment when pilgrims from overall Europe visit it. It has to be said that the first impact with Venice is an emotionally charged one. Ogier d'Anglure, a French pilgrim from the end of the 14th century, has left this account of his first view of Venice. Nous arrivâmes à Venise le lundi 9 jour d'août, laquelle est très excellente, noble, grande et belle cité, toute assise en mer. On l'a dite cité de Venise, un mot de belle église, et qu'elle nous furent montrées plusieurs saintes reliques. Therefore, there is an aesthetic element in this description, but it's immediately associated with the possibility to see many relics. Why there is this possibility? Normally because pilgrims spent about 2 weeks in Venice waiting for to embark on ships. So they had time. They had time to go through even the smaller churches, even to go to as far as to Murano or Torcello and try to see what was kept there. So some relics were known also from earlier sources, and they were probably, given an even more emphasis in order to suit the pilgrims' wish to see notable things. But I suspect that some relics appeared just as an outcome of this multiplied presence of pious people in the churches of Venice. So here you see a famous view of Venice made by a German artist, Erhard Reuwig, who accompanied another pilgrim Bernard of Breitenbach in his voyage to the Holy Land, and so practically he was Breitenbach's photographer. So he said, just take views, pictures of all the sites we will be visiting, and he's not the only one to do like that in the 15th century. So we have here we can get an idea of how Venice was perceived as this space, this intermediary space between earth and sea, where pilgrims spent a long time before embarking for their final goal. And we can also have an idea, thanks to this image, of how the ships looked like, the galère of Venice, of 15th century Venice. Well, pilgrims make acquaintance with other pilgrims in Venice. So they gather all together in the same period, and there they meet with people from other countries. So perhaps for the first time they make acquaintance with people from Spain, from Germany, from France, etc. So you see, for example, the pilgrimage travelogue written by Dom Louvant, les Occans étaient d'Espagne, d'Angleterre, de Flandre, de Lombardie, d'Allemagne, de France, de Bretagne, justement, et des tant de lieux. Mais tant il y a qui en avaient beaucoup de bonnes grosses maisons, comme à leur noble tas pouvaient en apercevoir, et d'aucuns qui calaient leur dignité de peur d'être connus comme évêques et abbés pronotaires et autres. This is also interesting that some of them disguised themselves in order not to be recognized, because they knew they had to spend a long time in the ship with other people of all possible state and condition. And so for the rich people, the important people, it was important to conceal their identity so that they may not be in some way offended or...
I'm sorry, Michele, just
yeah.
a small observation. It's interesting for us. We will discuss a lot, of course, the Turner's issues, and especially his idea of communitas with the pilgrimage. And so Turner's a bit hippie ideas about his equalitarianism during the pilgrimage. And this text is quite interesting because you are explaining it in a like practical way, but on the other hand, it means really that this international, supranational group, which is supposed to form this communitas on the ship, because they will stay together, is in a certain sense not without hierarchy, but that persons who are very high in hierarchy don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
So that so that the communitas could, in certain sense, be also practical issue, because without hierarchy, you don't have to protect yourself so much.
We will see it better tomorrow, because we will see how they were obliged to sleep, for example, all together, one close to the other, in a very, uncomfortable way. But let's leave it for tomorrow. I find this sentence wonderful. Nous, étant du lieu de Venise, sans faire autre chose sinon visiter la ville, les églises, et sans lieu. Donc, they had nothing to do, so this is the reason why they go around and look for relics of any kind. So you can imagine, Venice was obviously an important town on religious ground even before, but it had probably never experienced such a mass tourism, let's say, avant la lettre. And this leads to invest local relics with meanings which were probably not the same they had originally. And in some way, I suspect that local religious authorities, or simply the priests ruling a church, make frequently any possible effort to give value to their relics, to attract pilgrims, to show them what they have. So this brings to a multiplication of relics and to the making of a new local network of holy objects. Okay, just to evoke Venice and its condition, it was obviously everybody knew that the body of the Apostle Mark was kept in the Duke's chapel, San Marco. But strangely enough, pilgrims tend not to say much about this relic simply because they were not admitted to see it. Mm-hmm. It was concealed in the crypt, and I mean, it's the same for modern visitors. Nobody is admitted to see the tomb of Saint Mark. So they are not so much interested in this because of its inaccessibility, and this, instead of it, they lay emphasis on other relics. So the bodies of Saint Nicholas, for example, everybody knew that Saint Nicholas was in Bari, but the Venetian alleged that they had the real relic and that the Bari one was a fake or something which did not really belong to his original owner. Then they had other less known saints such as Isidore of Chios, and especially after the fall of Constantinople, as you know, many important relics from the Byzantine capital were transferred to Venice, such as especially a piece of the Holy Cross and an ampulla containing the Savior's holy blood. And there was a debate about the real identity of this relic, if it was a relic e latere, that's from Christ's side, so from his body, or a relic blood ex imagine, that is from the pious icon of Beirut, which is another story. Then an arm of St. George, the school of St. John the Baptist, but perhaps even more important were the full bodies. Pilgrims made always a very clear distinction between body parts and full bodies. And I will insist on this topic because it's important. A full body makes a simple church something different. If you have a full body, this becomes a focus of your devotion. In a way, the presence of a full body transforms a space into a site. But I will come again to this notion. And Venice has many. This makes Venice really original in its cultic offer, let's say. It owns the full bodies of Saints Lucy, Simeon the Holy Priest, and Empress Helena. After that, in 1258, also the body of Saint Barbara is deposed in the church of Santa Maria Assunta dei Crociferi. So these holy objects makes Venice distinctive in some way. Well, I won't read all the text, but you see that Venice comes to be perceived as a very important first step in the pilgrim's experience of the Holy Land, because many of these relics are in some way connected with Palestine. And so they anticipate what pilgrims can see over there. Another important point is this one. Pilgrims were perfectly aware the holy objects in Palestine are distinctive if compared with any other holy objects they could venerate in Europe. In Palestine, you have only portions of grounds said to have been connected with gospel events. You have no relic. And they say that all relics were brought either to Constantinople, either to Western Europe, but there is no relic in Palestine. At the same time, there are no miraculous images. Miraculous images are a phenomenon connected only with, let's say, secondary places which have no specific apostolic mementos, with the only exception of Rome. Well, but William Way lists all relics in Venice, and practically this is the most important place from this viewpoint, from the number of holy mementos. So in Venezia proprio sunt iste reliquie. In primis est corpus Sancte Luciae Virgini, ite femur Sancti Christophori, a big bone of St. Christopher, probably a dinosaur or something there, which was there. Item corpus Sancti Zacharie, Patris Sancti Ioannis Baptisti, item corpus Sancte Sabine, item corpus Sancti Pancrasi, item corpus Sancte Marine, item brachium sinistrum Sancti Georgi, item imago Beatissima Mariae Virgine facta ex Petra, quam percussit Moses in deserto, et ex ea produxit aquam, item in ecclesia Sancti Marci, est imago Christi crucifixi percussa Iudeo cum pugione, quinquiesque sanguiniabat. Et ille sanguis servatur est ostenditur bis in anno, etc., etc. And then other bodies of any kind. So Venice is considered to be the richest place in connection with relics that pilgrims may encounter during their voyage to the Holy Land. And let's see some of them. The body of St. Lucis, still today an important pilgrimage site. Then in San Giorgio Maggiore, the body of St. Helena, Helen, Empress, Constantine's mother, so one of the most important Constantinopolitan relics. In San Niccolò di Lido, they had the body, but you know, as I said, many pilgrims, even many Venetians probably, were doubtful about the authenticity of these relics. So starting from the 15th century, this doubtful approach by pilgrims is in some way fighted by the local clergy by offering other attractions connected with St. Nicholas, which are not the body. So they started displaying the mitre and the crozier of St. Nicholas. Obviously, he had not, because he lived in the 4th century, so there was no mitre and no crozier. But in any case, it was a bishop. It was represented in iconography with such attributes. So they offer the attributes, the real iconographic attributes, to pilgrims. And this is just the outcome of the fact that pilgrims, having nothing to do during their stay in Venice, go to San Niccolò di Lido to see something, what is holy there. And given that, you know, the bones are not are suspicious, they shift their attention to other objects. Well, I don't know what happened over this. I try to inquire, but this church is one of the most complicated in Venice. They never allowed to enter, so I don't know. Well, and an important thing is that there is a good spring, water spring, near San Niccolò di Lido, and pilgrims think the good quality of this water is connected to its being close to the holy site of St. Nicholas. So they go there to feel their to get water to bring with in their voyage. Okay. Then San Zaccaria, we have mentioned with the relic of Saint Zacharias, and also, this is interesting, the Duke Frederick of Liegnitz states that the church owned also an ampulla filled with oil of St. Catherine. So this is the mirror of St. Catherine, which was collected by pilgrims on the top of Mount Sinai. So in some way they have a first reminder of what they will see at their final destination. Okay. Then San Pietro di Castello, okay. It's interesting that they go with small ships to see the different Venetian islands and to look for all kinds of possible relics. And it's really a mass tourism, because you see, Felix Fabri says, era tautem magna hominum compressio, propter sacras reliquias videnda. There was such a big mass of people to see the relics and to kiss them. This is important. When relics are offered to the site, actually they are also meant to be touched and kissed, not only with your mouth, but also, for example, you can touch them with some objects of your own property, rosaries, for example, or other objects connected with personal devotion, which are considered to be blessed if they are touching the holy matter of the saints' bodies. And he even mentions rings, golden and silver rings. And you see, the Paternoster, actually, the rosary started existing in this period, second half of the 15th century, but the proper name would be Paternoster, because originally it was used only to accompany prayers, the prayer of Paternoster, not so much Ave Maria, whose devotion emerged a little bit later. And you see here, probably Tanya noticed this term Klenodia, which is not Cicero's Latin, but it's Kleinodian. Okay.
How would you translate it? Kleinod, it's a precious little thing.
Holy, how can we translate it? It's a whole precious object. It's like Kostbarkeiten, more or less. So,
Klenot, I would say in Czech.
Yeah.
Because it seems that this etymology which is used in Czech for small precious objects.
So jewels, I think it means.
Exactly, it's really funny because it's the Slavic acceptation of the word is like.
Yeah, it's like it's a Latinization.
Would you say that there must be some personal or individual hint? It's Kleinod, perhaps not. No.
Anyway.
It has to have a special meaning. It's not only jewelry, I'd say.
It's more
special than just
special objects, or let's say.
In Czech we can use it also for speaking, for example, about the objects linked with the royalty. Královské klenoty. So it's the idea of the crown and all the attributes of the king are defined as klenot.
Or you can also use it for the best thing of its kind.
Yeah, but that's in the metaphoric sense. Yeah. So, for example, Betty is the klenot between us, for example, in the sense.
Thank you.
Well, another important aspect of such records is the fact that we record the emergence of new cult phenomena. So, for example, in the case of Santa Maria dei Miracoli, Felix Fabri says that he saw he he was involved in this cult phenomenon during his first pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the year 1480. And when he came back again for his second pilgrimage in 1483, he saw that everything had changed. In 1480, there was only one image, which was fixed to a wall outside in the street, And when he came back, the people had just started saying that it was miraculous, that it worked, miracles. Well, when he came back, he saw that a big church had been constructed in her honor. And this is Santa Maria de' Miracoli, one of the most important churches in Venice, which we visit today. Well, obviously the experience of the Piazza San Marco was something important. This was the political center of the Serenissima, and obviously one of the most frequently represented in views of Venice. The Duke's church, the Duke's chapel, it would be, but it's obviously much more than a chapel, was visited with much interest by pilgrims who recorded here perhaps for the first time something which we can describe as an aesthetic experience. They not only listed the ancient, let's say, the marvels, the mirabilia of the church, such as the horses, the bronze horses, but also they remarked the fact that this church was completely decorated with marbles and mosaics. But it's important to observe that marbles are statistically mentioned more frequently than mosaics. So it's a completely different perspective, because the modern tourist will be fascinated only by the appearance of mosaics. But for them, marbles were very important, the incrustation of marbles. So for example, Pierre Barbatre gives even a description of the disposition of porphyry roundels inside marble decoration of the walls, and also the pavement, which is something we never look at. 15th century pilgrims looked at pavements at floors, decorated floor, with much interest, especially because we have to consider that many churches in this period had no floor at all. So just an earth, it was covered with earth. So when they saw marble pavement, this was something which had a great impact on them. And obviously, the mosaics. The mosaics made certainly a big impact. I can read this passage because it's interesting. Item généralement toutes les voûtes, arches, le haut de piliers, les creux sont tout carrés et les hauts de parois sont totalement faites et peintes en histoire, en plat, de toutes couleurs, en grandes images faites par la manière de parler en art de musique, ou assis, et tout de fin or de ducat en personnages comme portail et voûte. Comme Dieu créa les mondes, le ciel, la terre, le soleil, la lune, la mer, l'Ancien Testament, le Nouvel, paradis, enfer, la vie des saints, et toutes choses que l'on fait penser pareillement dehors comme dedans. So this is the major impact. So the extension of mosaics everywhere in the upper zones of the building. This is something which they will remind of when visiting Bethlehem, for example, because they say that Bethlehem looks like San Marco because of this extension of mosaics all around the wall.
Yeah. So what's interesting really is that if I follow your hierarchy, we are speaking first about materiality, and only in the second step, and even I would say in the less important part, about, let's say, the iconography, the interpretation. Yeah. But, well, can you just do you have an idea why? Because I would say for the marble, of course, it's the antique tradition of the let's say, dado in marble, it's important, it's precious, it's lecture, so on. I could understand that for tourists from Germany, it can be fascinating to see a lot of marble, which is not so common on the north of the Alps, but still, the fact that, I would say that, of course, the modern viewer will be interested by the narration, by the images, and it seems that for pilgrims around 1480, the materiality is much more important than the interpretation in a certain sense. The material in himself, like.
Well, from their perspective, they are looking for anticipation of the cultic experience they expect to have in the Holy Land. So their primary goal is to find relics. And by the way, we will see some examples during these classes, but I'm much troubled by the way in which relics are described. So for example, when they say, I looked at the body, the full body of Saint Simeon in Zadar, and this is an extremely beautiful relic. And they say that there were no teeth, there was nothing inside because it was very old, and they found the relic beautiful. So what does this beautiful, this term mean? Which kind of aesthetic experience could be associated with viewing a dead body, a mummified body? This is something important. So you will find more aesthetic appreciation of relics than of works of art in our modern sense. In their perspective, decorations of a church is something which contributes to the enhancing of the cultic authority of a relic, or a collection of relics, or of a holy site in general. So it's something secondary. It is what, for example, 14th century Pilgrims says about Bethlehem. That's at the point. He starts describing the beauty of the church. He says it's astonishingly beautiful, but we should not speak about this temporalia. So for them, it's something closer to the profane than to the sacred in some way. Something which embellishes the space constructed around the holy site, but what we are searching for is the holy site and the experience we can have over there when facing the holy. It's something completely separated. They want to see what is not made by human hands, not what is constructed, or it can be even extremely beautiful, and they say, okay, this is extremely beautiful and demonstrates that the local people, the doges, the political authority, the religious authorities engage themselves in honoring God in the best way. So they didn't spare money. They wanted to honor God in the best way. And this is clear. But we should not deal with this, especially because what we are interested in is something different.
And I have another, just a curiosity,
Yeah.
because I have no idea of all literature. Would you distinguish in between pilgrimage literature, like not dealing with the places or with the aesthetical values of the sites, in comparison to all, for example, this text, which is interested in other things? I mean, it must be difficult, and I imagine that there won't be any precise line in between those types of literature, but it comes into my mind listening to your discussion now, whether there is a sort of certain pilgrimage literature which is interested in certain things, and other, let's say, travel literature which has another...
Let's say that in my experience, actually, in very general terms, it can be said that obviously in the second half of the 15th century, texts tend to become generally larger and to include more details. So even secondary aspects of the voyage are described, and this includes also artworks. but there is also a problem, I think, of simply of individual choice, because some of them are extremely loquacious. So this Pierre Barbatre describes everything. I mean, even places he visits in Piedmont, where nobody Sì, è quasi finito. Okay, so Pierre Barbatre again. Il tient dessus le portail au bout, à main dextre. Il y a une petite chapelle laquelle ne clôt point. So it's always open. And this is something we know also from other sources. La porte du bout est de bois. On peut bouter sa tête par le trou. Là est une image de Notre-Dame bas contre un petit autel, mais en haut, on la paroi, est une image de Notre-Dame faite de la pierre sur laquelle Moïse férit de sa verge quand les enfants d'Israël lui demandèrent à boire, et de laquelle ici une fontaine. Au milieu du portail est une autre Notre-Dame où le peuple a grande dévotion. So here he remarks something which is neglected by all other pilgrims, an image which is over the door opening into the narthex of San Marco. So actually, this is the Kyriotissa image represented in the mosaic, which we see now with many restoration and alterations, but the original was this one which is now kept in the San Marco Museum. Again, a Kyriotissa image. So it's interesting that the Kyriotissa is a sort of obsession for Venetians, and it's something which hints obviously at Constantinopolitan models, even if nobody managed to understand which prestigious icon in the Byzantine capital displayed this iconographic feature. And so the Mary holding Mary in this way, and having a mappula in her hand. It's a type which is obviously very much widespread in Eastern Christianity. So I show a Georgian example at the Gelati Church, again in Georgia. But it's something which, since the very beginning, since the earliest phase of decoration in San Marco, is already present, as here over the main portal to San Marco. Well, I think it is not by chance that the Nicopaea image, which was to become the most important holy object in the basilica, corresponded to this type. Actually, this image is still enigmatic. Here, worship, according to a recent study, did not begin before the 16th century, when it is officially recorded in the state's annals and in a number of Venetian sources. But pilgrims anticipate Venetian sources. William Way mentions an image painted by St. Luke and exhibited together with the rest of the treasury of San Marco already in 1458. Previous to that, there is only an ambiguous mention in an inventory of San Marco in the mid-14th century. But pilgrims begin to mention this icon regularly, starting from the second half of the 15th century. So this means that it had become in some way more visible. And I'm showing here a copy made in the early 17th century, which shows how it could look like in the previous century, especially for the presence of this detail of the diaphanous mappula. Well, here, okay, I have already mentioned some of the major data on it. In any way, it can be said that the cultic emergence or the cultic promotion, the big style cultic promotion of the Nicopaea starts in the second half of the 15th century, when pilgrims record its existence as an image said to have been painted by the evangelist Luke. And I think this is in some way, a deliberate strategy, not only to rival important cultic phenomena associated with Constantinople and Rome, where the most important Lucan icons were preserved, but also in some way to respond to the pilgrim's habit to move from Venice to Padua to worship the image painted by St. Luke, which was worshipped in the Benedictine church of Santa Giustina. Given that pilgrims consider this to be the most important attraction they could see during their stay in Venice, I suspect that the Venetians were not glad, not happy with this, that the most important attraction was located outside the lagoon. And so they started alleging that the Nicopoeia had to be an image painted by St. Luke. Well, in some way, the case for the choice of the Kyriostis type, and I come to the conclusion, is interesting because it was rooted in San Marco. It was a sort of eponymous image of the Duke's church, but it was represented only in mosaic. And you see, the people had started, we see from Pierre Barbatre, that the people had started worshipping a mosaic, and this one. But the mosaic is fixed to architecture. It cannot be moved. It cannot be brought on procession. So, my suspicion, obviously I'm speaking of a hypothesis, but I think a reasonable hypothesis, is that they made, at this point, or they provided themselves with an icon corresponding to the same iconographic type which was considered to be so indicative of San Marco, and transformed and made an icon out of this. The same process can be detected in Murano. In San Donato of Murano, the Virgin displayed in the Alps is represented in this orand pose. Well, it is not, perhaps not by chance, that somebody decided that an icon should also be offered to the people's devotion. In some way, because the icon, its morphology itself was associated with the idea of image worship. And so I think that I came to my final slide, and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or comments or critics, I'm ready to interact.
Are there any questions? Doubts?
I had a question. Given that there exists so much formal literature, and that the horizon of expectation of the pilgrims was maybe high or low, I don't know, were there any stories where the pilgrims are disappointed by what they see? Or
well, see, we have seen Severs who says, but I couldn't see any relic in San Marco. This is a sort of disappointment. Some of them are disappointed by the fact that, not in Venice, obviously in Venice they have an experience which can be compared with more analogous experience they may have had in other places, because it's a Catholic town in an important environment with beautiful churches and so on. When they go to the Holy Land and they see only poor ruins, so some of them say, well, I expected to see something more. But then they immediately find a counter-argument. We say that the more site is ruinous, the better I can figure out how how the gospel events took place, and in some way the reconstruction, the meditation, the locative meditation, as they say, memoria locativa, they say, becomes a much more engaging devotional experience. So in some way they always find a good counter-argument to the lack of beauty in architectural or artistic form.
I have just a question about the way back, because you are discussing a lot that we will not go back, but
Yeah.
they definitely went back through Venice.
Yeah.
Are there any narrations about their second visit to Venice? I would say, is there something which is happening with the pilgrim on the way back? It is still interested into visiting all the churches? Is this like going back to the same objects, or do we have
Sometimes, but not very frequently. But at least they are not interested in recording this second experience because, well, just the final parts normally. The way back is told in much quicker terms, so they tended to be less detailed.
Yeah, that's interesting, really, because we were like trying to imagine what it would be to now have like 4 other months walking back, you know, and you were thinking, would it be like radical or just like only the way back? I mean, how is the attitude of the person who already reached the holy place and is going back?
In general, during the way back, they mention only those sites which they were obliged to visit because they escaped a shipwreck, so they made a vow to go again to that place to fulfill their vow. But otherwise, no, they are not especially detailed. But this may be also due to the, you know, the form, of the literary genre.
Of course.
Yeah.
Betty and Martin?
Well, I have a question about, because you showed us only male travel guides, do we have also...
Only?
male
Men.
From men writers.
Yeah.
Do we have some guides from women, like as the one from the late antique period?
Yeah.
Algeria?
Women are known to have gone on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, even in the late Middle Ages. It was always much more complicated for them. But we know, for example, that in ships there was a sector reserved for them. So this means that they were there. They did not leave many travelogues. That's a problem. One of the most, let's say, one of the most famous is that of Marjorie Kemp, an English mystical, whose travelogue is actually not really, does not correspond to the standards or the genre. So it's very complicated to read, actually. But it's basically a sort of meditation she makes on the holy sites. She gives almost no details about the way to the Holy Land. Marjorie Kemp. It's one of the most important texts for the Middle English literature, which it's given to students at university. Students of literature read it regularly. But, well, it's not especially interesting from our perspective because she invests the sites, obviously, especially it's a meditational exercise more than a travelogue.
So there is like no need to be linked, for instance, for some princesses or noble women to St. Helen or something like this in the
No.
later Middle Ages?
No, in the later, well, it was a problem. I will mention this tomorrow, but obviously you had to have a special dispensation from the Pope to go on pilgrimage. In general, this was for men and women at the same time, but you could buy it in Venice, You know, you went to the travel agency, you know, and you could buy the papal dispensation. But for women, it was more complicated. For lay women, we don't have many data. For religious women, you know, given that many of them stayed in monasteries and were not allowed to get out in some way, there was no possibility actually to travel. But this impossibility caused the writing of many travelogues by men who expressly stated that you were writing for nuns who could at least make a spiritual mental pilgrimage by reading. So, for example, Felix Fabri writes for a nun. And in some way, pilgrimage is basically masculine activity, but the reason for writing their experience, even in detail, is connected with this need to offer something to women prevented from traveling.
We read something about this, like the anthropological text. You read some of them about the pilgrimage for women and the way in which it's like sort of liberation of the woman. It's quite interesting, but I can give it to article. Farrell?
You mentioned the liminality of Venice, which the city has with this unusual setting. So I was just wondering whether this is evoked also in the text within these travelogues, like leaving something behind and heading somewhere else. And also it's connected to the liminality of the ocean, or that like pilgrims would speak about this. I don't know.
Well, they noticed the oddity of a town built in the middle of a lagoon, so between earth and sea. Then they mentioned some local habits, rituals connected with a special relation, or staging actually, the special relation of Venice with the sea. For example, the marriage of the sea, which was celebrated in front of San Nicolò di Lido by the Doge, when he actually threw a ring in the sea in order to manifest that Venice was the spouse of the sea. So they were much impressed by this point. Then San Nicolò di Lido was basically the point through which they entered the Adriatic Sea. And this passage is normally given some emphasis when the ship leaves the lagoon and enters the Adriatic Sea. But okay, I will give some more details tomorrow about this.
There are not any other questions?
I would like to ask about the role of city of Rome in the pilgrimage. How often pilgrims first went to Rome and then to Venice, and so for Polish blessing?
Not many of them. There are some cases of pilgrims combining the two pilgrimages. Some of them, from Germany especially, go first to Rome and then in the second half of the 15th century, they also go to Loreto, which becomes an important holy site in the Italian peninsula, and then from Loreto to Venice. But it's a late phenomenon, I have to say, and most of them go straight to Venice and then to the Holy Land and reserve the Rome pilgrimage to another occasion.
So if it's everything, I will say once more thanks to Michele for this first lecture. We'll push it tomorrow as planned, as today. Hopefully we will be more precise at the beginning tomorrow. And so for today, we will have a lunch like in 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, because you're also waiting for the rest of the Tanya's, let's say, troops, which are arriving. And so Stefano and Francesco will arrive hopefully in like 40 minutes. And we will have the Tanya's speech today at 4 in the afternoon. We have this break, so the Mont-Saint-Michel is quite close. There is a nice bar, so I mean, there's possibility to do something. Or you can have just rest somewhere here. I mean, the house is in our disposition. We have this break because we are obliged to have stuff to do in virtual space with Brno. And now to leave this space, we have to go through the kitchen, which is underground here, because we can use the main room because they are having a meeting. We are not supposed to disturb them. Just let's leave this way. And so lunch in like 40 minutes, and then we will have this break after lunch, and then the Tania's lecture at 4 p.m. And hopefully we will be very precise, because I know that Tania